Welcome to my 226th video on my work with OO gauge. In this video I'll be once more dealing with an LMS 264 tank loco for my Hornby Dublo 3-rail railway. Previously I've dealt with refinishing the bodies of Dublo and Wrenn 264 tanks to put them into LMS livery. But those bodies were really modelled on the BR4MT version of the 264 tank, not an actual LMS version. The 264 tank design went through 3 different versions under the LMS, initially designed by Sir Henry Fowler in 1930. The design was revised by William Stanier in 1935, and again by Charles Fairburn in 1945, before the BR version arrived in 1951. In this video, my aim will be to fit a kit-built body based on the 1935 Stanier version of the 264 tank to a Dublo 3-rail chassis. I bought this model on eBay UK. It features a kit-built Stanier 264 tank body on a modified 2-rail Hornby Dublo chassis with tension lock couplings. It was sold as a non-runner, so I didn't expect the 2-rail chassis to work when I received it, but that didn't concern me greatly as I really bought it just for the body, which I thought I should be able to fit to a 3-rail Dublo chassis. I noticed these rather strange-looking bent vents on the side tanks in the eBay listing pictures, and I initially thought that this represented damage that would need to be repaired. However, when I looked into it further, I found that some, though not all, of the Stanier tank engines did in fact have these vents, and they were bent inwards in an S shape like those on the model, presumably for reasons of keeping within loading gauge. Since I bought this model specifically to reuse its body with a different chassis, I immediately wanted to remove the body from the chassis, and I got it into a servicing cradle on the bench for this purpose. I started by undoing the screw holding on the front pony truck, as the body retaining screw for the Dublo and Wrenn 264 tanks is located at the front and it can't readily be accessed without removing the pony truck. With the pony truck removed, I was indeed able to see the body retaining screw in the expected position. I undid that screw. With that screw removed, the front of the chassis was loose from the body, but I wasn't able to easily lift it up and pull the chassis from the body, as would be expected with the Dublo and Wrenn models. I undid the screw holding on the rear bogie in order to try and see why the chassis seemed to be hung up in the body at the back. I removed the rear bogie. The kit-built body was noticeably longer than the Dublo and Wrenn bodies. On those models, the rear of the chassis slots directly into the rear of the body. In this case, the rear of the chassis was fitting against a separate plate, which was about 3/8 of an inch forward of the rear of the body. The chassis was clearly marked as a Dublo type EDL18, which was a good sign, as I wanted to fit the body to a 3-rail chassis of basically that same type. There was no additional screw or other fixing at the back. It appeared that the reason the chassis didn't want to come out of the body was just that it was binding on the cab steps, which were angled inwards somewhat. By gently bending the cab steps out a bit, I was able to lift the chassis from the front and then remove it from the body by pulling it forward, pulling the rear tab out of its slot in the body plate. Although the chassis was from a Dublo 264T, it had clearly been modified substantially. The original Dublo vertical motor was no longer there. Instead, there was a shaft with a crown gear where the vertical motor would have been, and that crown gear was being driven by a plastic pinion on a shaft coming through the hole for one of the Dublo motor brushes, with that shaft being driven by a Mishima motor with a flywheel mounted further forward. None of this actually worked, however. I wasn't able to get the Mishima motor to turn by applying power to the wheels and/or the chassis. But when I applied power directly to the contacts of the motor itself, the motor did turn. One obvious reason things weren't working was that the wire coming from the wheel pickups was broken off where it had been soldered to the wire to the motor. I resoldered that join, and then I was able to get the motor to operate and to turn the wheels by applying power to the wheels and the chassis. Although this was all rather by the by for me, as I wasn't really all that interested in using this chassis for anything. Here you can see the body and the chassis of this model. Now I wanted to try and mount this body to a Dublo 3-rail chassis. I had a Dublo 3-rail 264 tank on hand, still in its BR livery as originally sold by Hornby. I had bought this model some time ago specifically with the idea of mounting a kit-built body to its chassis. Actually, I was planning to build the body myself from a white metal kit, and I may well still do that. But when I found the model with the kit-built Stanier body on eBay, I decided to go ahead with using that first. I undid the screw retaining the front pony truck on the 3-rail model. As before, this revealed the body retaining screw. I undid that screw. And in this case I was then able to remove the chassis from the body by lifting the front and then pulling forward. You can see the Dublo vertical motor here. The other chassis would originally have had an identical motor before it was converted to the arrangement with the Mishima motor. I put the kit-built body into the servicing cradle ready to receive the Dublo 3-rail chassis. I was able to fit the 3-rail chassis into the kit-built body. However, I couldn't attach the kit-built body using the screw from the Dublo 3-rail model. It appeared that the kit-built body required a longer retaining screw, and I had to use the longer screw that came with the new model in order to retain the Dublo chassis in the kit-built body. The screw on top here is the Dublo one. The one from the new model was at least 1/4 of an inch longer. With the body retaining screw tightened up, I refitted the pony truck. I was a bit concerned about the fit of things at the back of the model. Because the kit-built body was quite a bit longer than the Dublo body at the back, the simplex coupling from the rear bogie barely reached beyond the rear buffer beam. The new body sat quite well on the Dublo chassis, but I wasn't too sure how coupling something to it would work given how little the simplex coupling protruded. There was also a possible issue with the chain-link coupling fitted to the buffer beam, a nice detail, but would it interfere with the simplex coupling? I got the model onto my 3-rail track to test it. It ran round basically okay, although since the new body was rather longer than the original Dublo body, there were some issues with it, possibly hitting things on bends, especially my little plastic tunnel. Another issue was that the uncoupling bar of the front bogie kept shorting to the centre rail, causing sparks all the time. I tried bending that bar, but I couldn't seem to get rid of the sparking problem, so I ended up just cutting off the bottom of that bar. I don't expect I'll be using the front coupling much, and I really don't uncouple using the uncoupling bars much anyway. I touched up the paintwork a bit where it was chipped, and also painted over the cylinders with flat black, as I didn't want the original red lining to show, as that wouldn't match with the new body. It took a couple of coats to persuade the flat black to hide the red lining. So here's where I was at this point, the kit-built Stanier body fitted to the Dublo 3-rail chassis, and the modified 2-rail chassis and the original Hornby body in BR livery basically going spare. I coupled the newly revised model up with some wagons. Somewhat to my surprise, I encountered no problems with the loco coupling to and pulling the wagons. Where I did have some problems was with keeping the wagons to couple with each other as they went round curves. That meat wagon at the front kept decoupling from the tank wagon behind it, so eventually I replaced the meat wagon in this train with something else. I did put the 2-rail chassis into the Dublo BR marked body. It fitted fine, as would be expected. One set of the front steps was broken off from the kit-built body, so I did my best to glue them back on. They originally broke off during shipping to me from the UK. I tried the model with the modified two-rail chassis on my test track. It didn't really run properly, although it did move a bit. I think something was shorting out, but for now I haven't bothered to try to diagnose that further, as I don't really have any use for this model except perhaps as a source for spares for other projects. I'm quite well supplied with 264 tank engines in two-rail. So now let me try to show you a little running video with this new 3-rail Stanier 264 tank on my Dublo 3-rail tabletop. Okay, let me see if I can video this newly bodied, well, whichever way around you look at this new combination of body and chassis running. Of course, it's always a bit of a act. I had a meat wagon in there behind him, and it stayed coupled to the engine fine, but it kept coming uncoupled from that tank wagon behind it. So I've taken the meat wagon out now and put that plastic super detailed, Glass Company wagon in instead. Let's see if I can get it to run. It would be a lot easier if I had 3 hands, or had an assistant, of course, because I've got to try and operate the train and operate the camera and everything at the same time. But let's see what we can do. Having trouble with this tunnel as well. This train sticks out quite a way from the track, so if I don't get that tunnel exactly centered, if I just touch that tunnel and push it a tiny bit off center, it'll hit the tunnel. It's this body, it's actually longer if you look at it. This body, this kit-built body's a bit longer than the standard, although it fits on the same chassis, than the standard Hornby body. So it's a little trickier to get it to run round things. But it is running. Well, of course the chassis is the same. This is I don't think I did service this. I think it came to me since I can't remember now. I mess around with so many chassis and whatever. But there you go anyway. I think we'll just stop there, right? So, I mean, yeah, it actually runs quite decently, and that's running with the Gauge Master controller, which supplies rather lower power than something like the MRC. So there you go. I'm not displeased with this effort.